Macron eats his heart out as NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg refuses EU's proposal on defense structure. NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg dismissed Emmanuel Macron's calls for an EU army and defense structure. Europe has no need for new structures related to European Union defense strategy, NATO Secretary-General Jens Stoltenberg said on Friday, a day after French President Emmanuel Macron called for a rethink of EU defense. President Macron said on Thursday the EU needed to define a new defense strategy that would strengthen its ability to defend itself, even though the transatlantic NATO alliance remained useful and effective. Speaking at a joint news conference with the French foreign and defense ministers in Paris, Mr. Stoltenberg said, "What we need is more capabilities, and not new structures competing for capabilities." The French president said on Thursday that reinforcing Europe's sovereignty, from ensuring its security and protecting its businesses to better controlling migration, will be a key aim of France's European Union presidency. France takes on the rotating 6-month presidency of the EU at a time of crises, including the COVID-19 pandemic and its economic aftermath, tensions with Russia, and heightened business rivalries with China and the United States. Speaking at a news conference at which he presented France's January to June EU programme, Mr. Macron said, "We must move from a Europe of cooperation within our borders to a Europe that is powerful in the world, fully sovereign, free in its choices and master of its destiny." A major priority, he said, would be immigration, at a time when Belarus stands accused of engineering a refugee crisis by flying migrants in the Middle East and pushing them to attempt to illegally cross its borders into EU states Poland and Lithuania. Among France's proposals will be setting up an emergency reaction force to assist EU states facing crises at their borders, Mr. Macron said. He also wants the bloc to have regular political meetings on migration, like Eurozone states already do on economic matters. The bloc has been deeply divided for years in its response to immigration and how to police the common external borders of its Schengen area, and it remains to be seen how much France can achieve during its presidency of the EU Council of Ministers, which mostly encompasses the agenda for meetings. But President Macron faces a presidential election in April, and conservative and far-right parties are likely to make migration, on which he is viewed by some as a soft touch, a campaign issue. Key also to ensuring the EU's sovereignty is to progress on defense issues, the French leader added. Since his election in 2017, Mr. Macron has been pushing for the EU to stand independent in terms of security, and no longer rely solely on US military protection inherited from World War II. A major aspect there will be pushing for an EU carbon border tax on a series of imports, something already put forward by the EU's Executive Commission to protect European industries from competitors abroad whose manufacturers can produce at lower cost because they are not charged for their carbon output. Turning to the economic impact of COVID-19, Mr. Macron said he would organize an EU growth summit in March. Boosting the bloc's growth model would require adjusting budget rules to make them more simplified and transparent, he said. Progress on the bloc's joint defense capability was also critical for ensuring the EU's sovereignty, stressed Macron. Since his election in 2017, the French president has been pushing for the EU to stand independently in terms of security, and no longer rely solely on the US security umbrella inherited since World War II. The need for EU's security independence was highlighted during the Trump presidency, with the former US president frequently undermining and threatening to pull out of NATO. French-US relations were also strained this year after the US, UK and Australia signed a new security deal called AUKUS, which led Australia to abandon its purchase of French submarines. Macron also said the EU should reconsider its strict budget deficit rules as governments spend heavily to save their economies from the impact of COVID-19 restrictions. France will push for a rethink of rules that include a demand for deficits to remain below 3% of gross domestic product, GDP, he said. Turning to environmental issues, he said France would propose a new EU mechanism to prevent imports of agricultural products from deforested areas when Paris takes over the European Union's rotating presidency next year. We will also advance negotiations on the creation of a European instrument to fight against imported deforestation, which will aim to ban imports to the European Union of soya, beef, palm oil, cocoa and coffee when they have contributed to deforestation, Macron said. He said France would host an extraordinary EU summit on March 10 and March 11 in Paris, just a month before the presidential election.